Why does a baby who was perfectly calm start screaming the instant you walk into another room? It isn't about missing you, it isn't a tantrum, and it isn't manipulation. This reaction comes from a part of the brain far older than any of that, one that evolved for a world where being left alone was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Picture an infant resting on a mat, calm, fed, surrounded by familiar sounds. Then a caregiver stands up and walks toward the doorway. The baby's head turns first. Then the arms reach out. Then the crying starts, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. Nothing dangerous has happened yet. The caregiver is only steps away. But the baby's body does not process it that way. To an infant's nervous system, distance itself is the danger signal. This isn't something a baby learns through experience. It shows up remarkably early, and it shows up in infants everywhere, regardless of culture, regardless of how safe the actual environment is. Which means it isn't a reaction to this specific moment. It's a reaction shaped by an environment that stopped existing for most of us a very long time ago. Go back far enough, and the reason becomes obvious. For most of human history, an infant left alone, even briefly, was in real danger. Predators moved through camps at the edges of firelight. Falls happened. Cold set in fast without a body nearby to share warmth. An infant had no ability to defend itself, find food, or regulate its own temperature. Survival depended entirely on staying within reach of an adult who could respond immediately if something went wrong. So, a baby who cried the instant a caregiver moved out of range had an advantage. A calm, quiet baby simply didn't. The crying wasn't weakness, it was an alarm, built to bring a caregiver back before distance turned into real danger. Infants who screamed the moment they lost physical or visual contact were more likely to get that caregiver's attention fast. Infants who stayed quiet and let distance grow risked being forgotten, overlooked, or simply too far away when something actually happened. Over enough generations, that difference mattered. The babies who reacted loudly to separation were the ones whose caregivers came running. And the ones who came running were the ones who kept their children alive. This instinct also lines up almost perfectly with a developmental milestone that matters more than it first appears. Separation anxiety tends to intensify right around the same age an infant becomes capable of independent movement, crawling toward objects, edges, and open space. It previously had no way of reaching on its own. A baby that can suddenly move itself away from safety needed a stronger alarm than one who could only be carried away by someone else. The timing isn't a coincidence. The anxiety seems to scale precisely with the infant's own growing capacity to get itself into danger. Around the same age, many infants also begin reacting warily to unfamiliar adults, a related but distinct instinct sometimes called stranger anxiety. An unknown adult in an ancestral camp was an unknown quantity, possibly harmless, possibly not, and an infant had no way to evaluate that risk on its own. Crying for a known, trusted caregiver rather than accepting comfort from anyone nearby was simply the safer default. Here's the uncomfortable part of this. This means separation anxiety isn't a flaw in a baby's emotional development. It's a precisely tuned alarm system built by thousands of generations of infants who didn't survive being ignored long enough, refined into exactly the reflex you see today. Every baby who has ever screamed the second a parent left the room is running a program that has been field-tested since long before recorded history existed. And here's a question worth sitting with. If an infant's brain treats physical distance as a genuine threat, what does that say about how deeply connection and survival are wired together in all of us, long after we've outgrown needing someone within arm's reach? There's a detail in this reflex that most people never notice, and it changes how the whole story reads. The anxiety isn't actually about the room. It's about whether the connection can be re-established. A baby who can still see a caregiver, even from a distance, often stays far calmer than a baby who has lost visual contact completely, even if the caregiver is physically closer in that second scenario. Sight was the ancient signal for safety. If you could see the person responsible for you, you knew, on some primitive level, that help was available if something went wrong. The moment sight disappeared, that guarantee disappeared with it, and the alarm had every reason to fire. This explains something almost every parent has noticed without ever tracing it back this far. A baby who tolerates a parent walking to the next room, as long as they can still be glimpsed through a doorway, might completely fall apart the instant that same parent steps fully out of view, even for the exact same amount of time. Distance was never really the trigger. Uncertainty was. You can see a smaller version of this same instinct even when nothing is wrong at all. Watch a toddler playing happily in a room with a parent present, and you'll often notice something easy to miss. Periodic glances back toward that parent's face, brief and automatic, sometimes many times within a few minutes. Researchers call this social referencing, and it functions almost like a manual check-in, a way of confirming the safety connection is still intact before returning to play. The crying that erupts when a caregiver actually leaves the room is simply what happens when that constant background check finally comes back negative. Now here's the second moment worth pausing on. If losing sight of a caregiver matters more than losing physical closeness, doesn't that suggest this instinct was built less around actual danger and more around the fear of not knowing? Maybe the ancient mind never needed proof of danger to react. It only needed the absence of proof of safety. That distinction runs deeper than infancy. Adults still carry a faded version of this same alarm. The unread message that suddenly feels ominous. The unanswered call that spirals into worst-case thinking within seconds. A partner who goes quiet for a few hours longer than usual, and the mind starts building explanations it has no evidence for. None of that is really about the phone, or the silence itself. It's the same ancient discomfort with lost contact, dressed up in a modern shape, still running on the same old logic that uncertainty is more dangerous than almost anything you could actually confirm. Ancient caregivers seem to understand this instinct without needing to explain it. Infants were rarely put down and left visually cut off from the group. They were carried, propped where they could see movement, kept within a sightline even during ordinary daily tasks that had nothing to do with immediate danger. This wasn't indulgence. It was aligned with exactly what the infant's nervous system needed to stay regulated. A baby who could see its world moving normally around it had far less reason to sound the alarm than one suddenly enclosed in silence and stillness, with no visual anchor at all. This also helps explain why a crying infant in an ancestral camp so rarely stayed distressed for long. It wasn't only that one specific caregiver returned. Often, whoever was nearest simply scooped the baby up and kept moving, folding the child back into the visible, moving world of the group almost immediately. The alarm wasn't answered by a single perfect solution. It was answered by proximity itself, restored quickly by whoever happened to be closest. Modern life rarely allows this kind of constant visual proximity, and that gap is worth naming honestly. Cribs in separate rooms, daycare drop-offs, a parent stepping into another room to answer a call. None of these are dangerous, but none of them fully register as safe to a nervous system still calibrated for a world where losing sight of your caregiver meant something had gone wrong. So, the crying you hear the moment you leave the room isn't your baby being difficult. It's an alarm system doing exactly the job it was built to do, thousands of generations deep, completely unaware that the modern world rearranged the danger it was designed to detect. The room is safe, the hallway is safe, you're only steps away. But the part of your baby's brain sounding that alarm has no way of knowing that yet. It only knows one old, simple rule. Out of sight was once the beginning of danger, and until it learns otherwise, that rule still runs the show. If this ancient instinct still feels familiar, subscribe to Primeval Psyche. Here, we decode modern behavior through ancient survival. The next fear may be much older than you think.